but if not, I won't and stuff. So that's all. So thank you very much for coming. Again, Andy, you can
Yeah, so basically, previously, Mike, you were talking about how someone who's highly intelligent doesn't necessarily mean they're equally functional.
yeah.
So I was thinking today we could talk about, some of that, tease that apart, maybe talk about some examples of the differences here. So why don't we start first with the difference between cognitive intelligence, like, cognitive horsepower, versus how well someone navigates their daily, demands in life, just getting along with others and getting things done. So can you talk about how intelligence, being highly intelligent and being high functioning can be different? Like these things are not necessarily, they don't always track, and
Yeah.
give some examples of that.
Yeah. So I think as a person who's on the spectrum, who is level two support needs, that the term high functioning that's used in the psychology world causes a problem in that even psychologists, mental health professionals will say just because they're looking at somebody who they feel is highly intelligent, they automatically equate that with high functioning. And I'm the kind of person that can easily come off as highly intelligent, well-read, book smart, very articulate, well thought out ways of looking at myself and good self-introspection. But functioning to me means, can you live independently, consistently in this socio-economic society, which means basically hold down a job, savings, proper health insurance, proper, car insurance, do all the things that you'd normally have to do in order to live independently in this country on your own. That's high functioning. I mean, that's functioning to me. But when I looked up the definition of what a psychologist would say is high functioning in the spectrum world, it simply means you can read and write. It's basically so it's such a broad category of what, exhausted myself managing everybody else's emotions. Okay. If you want to expand on that, just doctor, that would be, I wouldn't mind addressing that. Go ahead. So, Andy, did you want to?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that when you talk about functioning, you talked about down a job, savings, insurance, that sort of thing. But definitely like relating to people and relationships also, like communication with others falls into that. Just because you're smart or highly intelligent doesn't mean you know how to interact with others, and
Correct.
communicate. Maybe you can talk more about that.
Okay. So I'll try to put it in a very simplified way. So I apologize if this is over generalizing and simplifying things. But and I'll speak for myself. I'm book smart. So a lot of us who feel that, we're highly intelligent, we're book smart, meaning that, whatever hyper-focused interests that we have, because, people who are on the spectrum, we love to hyper-focus on our little things. Like me, it's my stereo and my espresso machine and music and movies, and I'll automatically read up on anything dealing with these things to the point where I'm overdoing it, and I can then spit out facts about something to the point where it's exhausting for somebody to hear it. That's book smart. So functioning to me means, can you take that intelligence and parlay that into a consistently financially independent life? And usually the answer is, when you're high functioning, highly intelligent but not high functioning, is no, I can't.
And so part of that is because maybe with high intelligence, people are very knowledgeable in a very narrow topic or area. But in general, to be high functioning, you have to do a lot of different things. You have to juggle a lot of different competing interests and tasks and manage your schedule. And,
Yeah,
it requires a breadth of things that you're, multitasking. You're processing a lot of stuff all at once. And that might be hard if someone's really used to hyper focusing on one thing.
correct. So I feel that in order to be high functioning, and you mentioned the thing about relationships, in order to be high functioning to me, you have to have a well-developed sense of three things. Your executive functioning, which is your problem-solving capabilities, your abilities to achieve goals in time by taking action steps, by embodying those little habits that move you towards success, executive functioning. Two is emotional regulation, that you have emotions, but they never get so intense that they begin to take over your body and affect your decision making, which is the third thing, which is behavioral control, impulsive behavioral control. And so when you get to these level one, two, and three support needs of being on the spectrum, a level one person can do all those things and be independent, but they would need substantial amount of help and support with um, executive functioning, help with emotional regulation, impulsive. So they may need a therapist, they may need a psychiatrist, a support group, they may need certain routines that they need. There's all these little tools, tips, and tricks that they can do to manage that difficulty within them. But when they do it, they can live independently on their own consistently. A level two person, those three areas, the executive functioning, the emotional dysregulation, and impulsive behavior control, are so intense, we are unable to live financially independently on our own consistently.
This is interesting because something you said there, functioning d depends on the ability to regulate your emotions and not just understand them. Like
Yeah.
an intelligent person could understand, okay, something that's going on, but you're still not able to regulate it. You still
Yes.
have behavioral control issues. So that's something where there's a difference between someone who's highly intelligent versus highly functional.
Yes. And I said that in an earlier video that being book smart and being highly intelligent means nothing from my experience of being able to regulate your emotions. I mean, people like me, we can seem very, very brainy in our head a lot. And that's true because we're using anything that we can to regulate our emotions, including our intellect. And it's mainly because though our emotions are so intense inside us.
Yeah. So someone might be processing things rationally, logically, but social interactions, emotions, it's a different skill set. It's a different,
It's a very different skill set. I
yeah,
mean, so you even have to have knowledge of what you're actually feeling. And so people on the spectrum, neurodivergent people on the spectrum, we flood a lot, meaning we are not the kind of we'll feel several emotions at the same time so intensely we can't identify any one of them. So what are you feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling. I feel like I want to explode. Like that's what we'll say. Something like that. Like it's normal. A lot of times when our emotions are intense, we're not just feeling one thing. We're feeling several things. Thus the feeling like you're emotionally flooding. And
what happens in that situation if you are kind of overwhelmed by all these different emotions? How does your body react, and then how is that perceived by people that you're with? Like how does that manifest itself?
so depending on the intensity and level of it, my body will go into a survival mode. It'll start using the lizard brain in the back to handle situations because it's just trying to tamp down the emotions. It's trying to get rid of the trigger. So emotions are too intense. Your body goes into survival mode. And in survival mode, what it's trying to do to resolve a problem, especially with a person, is just resolve the trigger. It doesn't want to get anxious. So it'll start saying rude, blunt, to the point things like, this isn't important. We just got to do it this way. And always will seem very demanding, very rigid, because inside we're feeling so emotionally overwhelmed, we're just trying to calm that down. So now all of our, in certain situations under stress, a lot of what comes out of my mouth, behaviors are all designed around that, and we're not thinking about how we're coming off. That's one of the last things you think about when you're in that mindset of just survive and eliminate the trigger.
Yeah. So you can be a very intelligent person. You're in a stressful emotional situation. You go into survival mode and you just want that stressor, whatever is triggering you, to stop.
Yes,
And so you say things or you do things because you're trying to, like that's your way of managing that emotion or that stress, is
yes.
to blurt out whatever comes to your mind or try to remove yourself from that situation or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like so overwhelmed with my stress at work that in a staff meeting, I hated chit chat. I couldn't stand it because I was like, I gotta, there's more productive things I need to be doing, and sometimes I would just blurt out I gotta go, or can you stop talking? Like sometimes I would just blurt that stuff out, and everybody who's having a good time socializing would just look at me, you know, like, and I wouldn't really, I'd be like, look, I gotta go. I wouldn't even be trying to be apologetic about it. Yeah.
But this is the kind of thing where you might be level two, you might be very intelligent. Rationally, you might understand that this is required or helpful for social interactions to get along with people, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're in that situation, you're not thinking rationally. It's just that emotional feeling. You just act, in the moment. Is that right?
Yes. And that's one way we have social interaction problems is like, we're stressed out. We go into more like this survival mode. We're flooding with our emotions because we feel our emotions more intensely. But other times, our social interactions issues are mainly, just simply because we don't know what's appropriate or not appropriate to say in a business situation or something like that. We'll just blurt out something that's inappropriate and we don't even realize we've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like certain careers would be better suited, for people like that. So you're saying like as a university professor, maybe you work by yourself, you have a more of an academic role, or you're writing or doing your work kind of by yourself. That then you don't have some of those stressors. You don't put yourself in that situation where you're under pressure, under stress, where that might result in a bad interaction with someone.
Yeah. And so I also want to say this because what I want to address is the difference between level one and level two support needs, and how a person who actually has level one support needs, like I was, level two support needs, like I am, looked like they were a level one. So that whole idea of the professor, or my mother was the same, in that she could hyper focus on chemistry. She loved working in a lab, chemistry, and she told me when I wanted to have a job and go for college, all I wanted to do was play with my chemistry set. I just wanted to play with my test tubes, Mike. And that's all I wanted to do. So she found a job when she just did that. And so she was able to function in the job. But I wanted to note the difference between level one and level two because it can have these subtleties in them, in my opinion. First of
Yeah.
all, level one, two, and three in the diagnostic dietitian manual, it's in there, but it's very vague as to what it means. It just says level one, needing support. Level two, needing substantial support. Level three, needing severe support. That's it. It's a very subjective thing. So, how do you know when you're in level one, two, or three? In my opinion, it is about being able to live independently, stably. So, you can look like a level one, but if you take the partner away who's taking care of everything, you'll realize you were a level two. You can't live independently on your own. So, the whole idea of the
Yeah.
professor, there are a lot of absent-minded professors out there who don't know how to be in relationships, who have poor relationships with their spouses and children at home, and things are just a mess there. But at school, because they're hyper-focusing on the topic, they look like they're in control. But when you see them at home, it's a mess. It's really bad. Now, are they level two? Not necessarily. However, if the home life is that bad, say there's addiction and physical violence at home that nobody sees at work, which is what was happening with me in my house growing up. There was physical violence there, stuff like that. Like in modern social work days, a person would say, we have to pull these children from the home, to tell you the truth. That's not functioning at a high level to me. You're functioning okay at work and you're going home and you're abusing your kids and drinking, like that's not level one to me. It looks like level one to people on the outside, but to people who know you, and if you said to that person, you have to be calmer here and balance this out better, they may not be able to function in their job now because now they have to be calmer all the time.
Yeah.
You know,
What you might say is that someone might be masking, so they might appear high functioning because they're spending a lot of effort during the day to say certain things, act
they're
certain
holding in their
ways, etc.
stress. Yeah, they're acting in ways that are not natural to them, and they're mainly holding in stress. Yeah.
Yeah. But then when they get home, they let the mask down.
They let it all out,
It all comes
and
out.
yeah, and their attitude is like, I'm home. I shouldn't feel like I have to mask. I should just be. able to be myself and they're just not thinking. And then you're with your family who will put up with you. Like, what are your kids going to do? Your boss can fire you, but your kids, and so that's what happened to us. So I would not call, honestly, my mother level one. She's autistic, she's on the spectrum, but I wouldn't call her level one functioning because at home, she wasn't, she was, she created a very volatile, traumatic, abusive, violent environment. And
Mm.
that's not functioning, high functioning to me.
So it's almost like level one when there's enough energy to mask and to control your behavior or whatever. But when you get home, you're spent. You just can't keep that up, or it just comes out. So that's more like level two.
Well, level, in that particular situation, level two is if your home life is so extremely traumatic, violent, abusive to your children, and modern social workers would come in and say, "Oh my goodness, we have to pull these kids from the home. They are getting bruised, they're getting cut, they're getting beaten, like all the time." And the parent is not even taking any responsibility for it. That's what was happening. And so that's a level two situation in which you seem to be functional here. You're definitely not functioning as a stable person here
Hmm.
at home. So we have to pull these kids from the house. Now, there are people that don't do that. They're still like high functioning at work. They're level two, really, but they're not violent. And one of the reasons why is their partner's taking care of everything.
Hmm.
And so you're you're snappy, things are difficult at home emotionally, but because your partner's there, raising the kids, buying the groceries, cooking all the meals, cleaning the house, doing all the management things that a person by themselves would normally have to do, and you don't have to do that stress anymore. All of that level two is masked. You can't see that just how non-functional they were. And so if that partner divorced them and then they were forced, not only are they masking at work, now they have to come home and do half of the raising of the kids, buying the groceries, cooking the meals, making sure the fridge is always all this stuff the partner was doing. That stress might cause them to then start honestly being abusive to the kids, hitting the kids, it's something where they're just getting violent and stuff like that, and they're acting way out of control. Then you'll see the level two that was being masked by a partner functioning and helping them out. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
That's interesting. So probably there's a lot of people in that situation where they are level two. They're with a
Yeah.
supportive partner or spouse or family member or whatever, and it's just wearing down that loved one, because they're shouldering more of that responsibility. They're providing the support because the level two person, needs more help there, and they just get burned out. It's understandable that that's difficult for that loved one, for that spouse who's supporting the level two person.
Yeah, I mean, it depends upon the balance and the needs of each person. Sometimes a person will put up with that person because they're the one bringing home the bacon, and so, I'd rather put up with this than have to do all that stuff on my own. So lots of times in a thing like that, it's an agreement. You bring home the bacon, I'll take care of all this stuff. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's just known among that family. Like if if the partner left, they'd be a mess. You
Yep.
know. Now, in my opinion, like I said, level two functioning is you're able to maintain work. No, hey, let me show you this. Level one functioning is you're able to maintain work consistently. You don't get fired a lot. You don't quit jobs a lot. You don't, yeah, you don't end up in these emotional situations where you have to leave the work and it happens every year. So you're able to maintain consistent work for, I'd say, at least a 5-year period. So that means you go through ups and downs at work, you go through administrative fallout, you just go through all these problems, but you're able to maintain your job. You're level one there, but also being level one at home when you go home means you are doing what you can to maintain a stable, healthy environment of well-being. So your sleep routines, your eating routines, your diet, exercise, like everything about that is, you're doing it well enough to be stable, healthy, and for your well-being. And so you can have somebody though that's level two who's masking at work. They look like a level one, but when they go home, they're a recluse. They have addiction problems. They're drinking a lot. They don't go out. They just stay home and drink. And that's not a sustainable, they're not going to last that long that way. and they just become these, or they're hoarders. You go into their place and oh my gosh, you didn't realize that they're functional at work, but when you go home and you look at their house and all, they're hoarders. That's a huge OCD addiction issue that can really affect your health. So they're not taking care of their health, they're not taking care of their well-being, they're not being stable, but they're able to just get to work on time and do that. Or a lot of times they work from home and they hide all this stuff, what they're like at home. That person I would actually call a level two, you know.
Can you explain what is that, when someone's a hoarder or they have that some kind of OCD behavior, how is that helping them self-regulate or how is that helping them feel better? Because they're clearly there's some kind of emotional dysregulation
Yeah.
and it's manifesting in this way. So
I,
somehow that
I
calms them down.
Yeah, I worked with an OCD person, and when they get into their mind that they didn't do their routine, or for a hoarder, like throwing things away, you know, it brings up such an uncomfortable level of anxiety
Hmm.
that doing that routine or keeping that thing will calm it down temporarily. And then they never throw anything away because the thought of it brings up all this anxiety, and it's just easier. It just calms it down to keep it. So they're dealing with strong anxiety issues that they need most likely, some kind of therapy, medication for. Yeah. But that's not a functional person to me. They can look functional at work, but you go home and they're not living a life in which they're stable, healthy, and living a life towards their well-being. No, I would say not.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not obvious maybe if you don't spend a lot of time with the person, if you just see them in a work context or a social setting that's only occasional, that person could be masking. They
Yeah.
could, and they use their intelligence to, they seem fine, they seem functional, but really they're hiding it or they're
Yeah.
masking.
But at home, they have addictions. They're drinking. They're hoarders. They barely go out. They don't socialize. You look at their fridge, it's empty. They barely go even go to the groceries. When it comes to hygiene, honestly, maybe they're like not taking showers. They're not really doing things in these patterns that would help with your stability, well-being, and health. I know that that's a spectrum that, but if it's getting to the point where you're not living a life of stability, well-being, and health at home because of all these things are just falling to the wayside, I would call that level two. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd like to understand better the difference between intelligence and kind of emotional intelligence or,
Yeah.
IQ versus EQ. Are you saying that people on the spectrum generally have like a lower emotional intelligence? Because some people are very empathic, some people are very in tune with others' emotions. So what is the difference there? You can have someone who's on the spectrum who is an empath, but also cannot read people or cannot understand social interactions and their emotional kind of reaction. Like it seems like it's a little confusing,
Well,
between,
basically, like I said before, being highly intelligent and book smart, even being able to earn money because you're good at one thing. Maybe you're good at the stock market or good at
yeah,
investing, and then you can make money and all. But when it comes to regulating your emotions, you can't be alone because you're scared to be alone.
okay,
You're not able to handle small little arguments with your child because you just blow up because you can't regulate your emotions, and you
yeah.
just drink, you just go to a drug just to calm down all the time.
So maybe that's the difference is it's the regulation of the emotion. Obviously, people still
Yeah.
have those emotions, they have those feelings. They can feel for other people. They can be empathetic. They can put themselves in other people's shoes.
They
How would
can
you?
do it only if they're stable themselves. When a person's that unstable emotionally, like I said, you're coming from the survival amygdala part of your brain most of the time. And when you're like that, it is like that part of your brain is every man for itself, right? And so, that brain is in a fight or flight survival mode inside. It will jettison anything that doesn't help it to survive, like compassion, empathy, trying to understand another person's point of view.
Hmm,
If inside you feel your life is being threatened, how is that going to help you? Like
yeah,
it doesn't, those thoughts don't even come up.
yeah. And in fact, that person might use their intelligence to rationalize the
Yeah.
situation or explain things away.
Yeah.
that can seem tone deaf or can seem to miss the point when you're
Yeah.
talking to someone.
And I made a video about that, the whole Star Trek comparison with Vulcans and stuff that I felt that, people on the spectrum were usually thought of to be pretty brainy in our heads. Like my own autism therapist said, you're pretty brainy, Mike. You're pretty much in here a lot. And it is because our emotions are so intense in there. We use our brains a lot to regulate our emotions. We try to make sense of things. We really try to like put intellectual categorical structures to things to calm the emotions down when we come upon something that doesn't make sense, that gets us scared. And so therefore we'll end up with this kind of way of understanding it and talk it through. And lots of times, yeah, well, then we will be then overly reliant on that logical system we've created to justify decisions and behaviors that seem more emotional to people. But you're like, no, 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 I had to do it that way because my boss was a jerk. So I had to quit a job for the 10th time in 2 years you know, because there was a good reason. Yeah.
It's kind of a self-justification to kind of protect yourself in a way. You're
Yeah.
rationalizing the situation to explain away that uncomfortable feeling or that
Yeah.
avoidance or whatever it is.
Yeah. You're doing anything to resolve these when they get triggered, these uncomfortable feelings within yourself. You'll do because they're so intense and sharp when they come up. And you'll do anything you'll use logic, you'll use drugs, you'll be reclusive, you'll say snippy, short, curt things to people. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like most people do want to be accepted by others. Would you say there's any difference for people on the spectrum about their desire or their need to be socially accepted? Do you feel like
I'd say it's the same.
it's the same? Okay.
I'd say it's the same. Sometimes people think, oh, autistic people, because they're so socially awkward and they're sometimes like mean and quiet to themselves that they don't like people. No, I think we do have needs for connection and community. The problem is the way our brains are set up and their emotions are. It just makes it so much more difficult than the average person. And then a lot of times I see people like us give up. Like I just want to live alone. I just can't stand people, and they just end up being reclusive because all their attempts to try failed.
Yeah, it's frustration
Yeah. Yeah,
because
it's
you're
just better. It's
maybe
better
not
that I don't.
understanding.
Yeah, because it's better that I don't interact with people. That's when you hear things like people suck. It's like I don't like to hang out with human beings. I just can't stand the human race because all they're. I think for a person like that, they do want to live in community with others. They want to get. They want community, but the way our brains are set up to deal with thinking through problems, dealing with our emotions, it's just so different that those things always, like most of the time, fall asunder, and then we just give up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this whole thing of difference between in high intelligence and high functioning, do you feel like the way that people on the spectrum process their environment, the stimuli, everything around them affects kind of how they interact with other people in a way that's, it's more on the intelligence side and not on the emotional kind of understanding or, is there something about that that explains if you're someone who has a loved one who's on the spectrum and you're trying to understand why do they act the way they do? Why do they say the things they say? Is there some insight that you could provide, in addition to what you've already said, that kind of helps explain this, this difference between intelligence and functioning that, maybe.
I'd say, yeah, when I see that kind of thing, again, it's the best analogy is that video I made about Mr. Spock and Vulcans and Star Trek, and that episode where the humans were injected with some kind of serum that turned them into Vulcans and they all collapsed to the floor. And it was because the emotions were too strong. And then Mr. Spock finally explained that's why we rely on our logic so much. It's not because we don't have any emotions, it's because our emotions are too intense. And therefore, our logical system becomes part of our emotional dampening system. And I are like, oh, that's like what autistic, that's what people on the spectrum are like. And then you watch the rest of the episode when it was a little bit insulting to Vulcans, really, because you could clearly see that they were making emotional decisions by applying logical, I've decided to end all friendships because it gets me upset. And therefore, it's more logical that you think we just shouldn't be friends, right? And then, but they're saying it very calmly, but they're saying this outrageous thing. And you can
Mhm.
tell It's because you can't handle what's happening inside you emotionally when you go out there. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the way to understand it. Like, so, they're in a little bit of, they're coming from their fight flight center a little bit. Yeah.
So someone who in that, who's like that, that they may be triggered, they may be in survival mode, fight or flight, so what can you do to help them, like, kind of regulate their emotions, help them feel safe and,
Yeah. First of
comfortable
all,
or
let me say, I feel the need to say in this whole video when I upload this thing, the spectrum disorder is such a wide range of people. As I'm saying all this stuff, and I realize it's not going to fit everyone. There's probably going to be people commenting, it's like, that's not the way I am. It's because of this. It's not the way I am because it's this. It's just, I'm more speaking from my experience, and I'm hoping that I can get a general swath of people that can understand from this point of view why, um, but when you say, what can you do to help? I would say, you know, learn what you can about autism and why they're like the way they are, and then just give them the space to be who they are. Give them the space to be autistic. Give them the space to be like they're not doing that and causing social interaction problems on purpose. And understand that, we do want connections with people. We want what everybody else wants, a happy, stable, connecting life with people and maybe family. It's just the way our brains are designed, and the way our, and also I should say this, the way society is designed, it doesn't mesh well enough. I mean,
yeah.
you have to play a certain game in our socioeconomic and even dating society. You have to play a certain kind of game that our brains sometimes just aren't designed to do well. So a really good example was my daughter finally brought over somebody that she was dating for the very first time, and she told me why she was hesitant about it. And she said it's because I was so scared of what you're going to say. Like and so here's the point though. Me and my daughter, we get along really well. She understands that I'm on the spectrum. She loves me. I love her. And so I was saying, I totally understand. And then she said, I could see why you weren't talking as much because I could see that, you were concerned about it too. I was like, yes, I know that I can say things that you'll be like, Dad, why did you say that? And I didn't even know what I had said. And so I didn't want to embarrass you in front of your friend or the guy that you're dating and all. So I just didn't say much. And she said, like, you know, so we both understood each other. I wasn't taking it personally. I wasn't saying to her, geez, you're putting me down. No, I can understand that because I knew that about myself. And I knew that I could be inappropriate. And so I was understanding why I was acting that way. She was understanding why we were acting that way. And then the very next day when we were talking about it, we were joking around about it at breakfast the way I was like not acting like sort of like myself because I was trying to, I didn't want to say something so inappropriate because I don't know what I'm saying sometimes that it's gonna have a problem with the person that she's dating. So I just sort of like was more quiet and she could see it, I could see it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have enough self-awareness to, I guess you could say, mask or control your behavior in some way and not just say things that normally you might say.
Yeah.
So
In that
that,
kind of situation. Now, if
yeah,
that person became part of the family, I couldn't keep that up.
yeah,
I definitely eventually just become myself. But into that particular situation for a few hours for my daughter, yeah,
yeah.
I would do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And just to kind of double down on the point you're making, there's like autism is it's a spectrum disorder. So there's very different ways that it manifests itself, and in fact, there's some recent research on this. I came across some news about it. Like they have, in the study, they identified four different distinct subtypes of autism. And so that makes it hard then to diagnose or to kind of categorize and what does this person need? It kind of depends on their own specific situation. So
Yeah.
it's not just one kind of autism, there's multiple kinds of autism
And
with
which
different kind of
one
characteristics.
cannot, yeah, and which one cannot understand or have compassion for the other. So
Yeah.
that's why, like, when a person's making a TikTok or a YouTube video on what it's like, you might get comments in there, well, that's not what it's like for me, or they might even start arguing and stuff. And I honestly feel that my ex was on the spectrum, but her type of autism was different than mine, and we just didn't get along. It's sad to me because, it creates a situation in which you cannot bond over being autistic, being born autistic, being this, having this kind of difference. and divergence. You can't bond that way because your category is different than their category. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it runs the gamut because some people have these emotional dysregulation issues, mood disorder issues. Some people have issues with attention and focus or disruptive behavior, or, it just depends. Developmental issues. It just depends on the kind of
Yeah.
autism they have. So,
Yeah, and when you say that the kind of autism they had, meaning like that's the way their body is designed to handle it. So my particular brand of autism with the ADHD under stress becomes very, very expressive, becomes very, very roller coastery. Or my ex, who also is autistic, her body would just go in and be quiet and just sort of handle everything on her own. As a result of that, over time, she could not stand my autistic expression of stress
mm,
because hers was so different.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you would also then self-medicate to kind of regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah, other people might not do that necessarily.
Um, well, when your emotions get that intense, I feel like a lot of people who have ADHD and autism, or sometimes really severe autism, you also end up with PTSD because you're so emotionally sensitive. And then when
Yeah,
you start to get, once your PTSD gets triggered in your brain and in your life, you can easily end up addicted. Multiple addictions,
yeah,
marijuana, drinking, video games. You'll be doing all sorts of things all at the same time to calm all that stuff down. You're not in control of your behaviors as much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe one of the things that comes to my mind is that your protocol helps people, kind of in this population. So that's another thing that, you've experienced this firsthand and you've figured out some ways that have helped you. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, just about, how the protocol helped you, how it might help other people.
Yeah. And so, again, I want to say, and I did want to make a separate video about this, like all the things that I do to help stabilize myself as a person who's ADHD, PTSD with level 2 support needs. Like, what do you do to stabilize yourself if you're talking about this stuff and you say you're a coach? And so it's a combination of things. Um, Mainly, I do have to be very careful of what I put my focus, effort, energy, and time into. And I have to make sure that it generally brings out the most stable version of myself as much as it can. And if I need, to take psych meds, things to help me be stable, I will do that. So for me, what helps me to be stable a good majority part of the time where I feel like I'm balanced, I feel like I'm a more, emotionally more stable. I take psych meds, I see a therapist, I have a support group that they're ADHD like me with PTSD and recovering addicts. And so I can relate to them and I talk to people like that, at least, 5 to 10 hours a week. My job as a coach is kind of job in which it brings out the best version of myself. And so I can relate to people who have issues like me, but because I'm in the coaching position and I've worked on these things myself, it brings that wise part of me out and interacting like that on a regular basis. So at least for an hour or two a day, I'm in that wise self. That helps to stabilize me. Also, again, I also do have to be concerned about how you spend your time. Like, are you doing relaxing things or are you getting into something that can easily get you all upset? So problem with us is we hyper focus on our interests, like, you know, like my stereo, because music really relaxes me as an autistic person. Hearing good music played in a really nice stereo really relaxes me like a meditation. But now, as a result of that, it costs money. And if something happens with the stereo, now all of a sudden something can trigger something that I love that relaxes me, triggers an autistic fit. And if I have PTSD issues on with that, it just becomes this ballooned, hyper-focused, you know, um, autistic emotional episode. And so I have to balance out like, what I choose to focus on. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I think that's a point maybe to transition to the
Yeah.
meditation portion. Maybe
Yeah.
you want
And
to
I
talk
want to talk
about.
about that because I didn't talk about that part of it. Also, what helps me is the somatic release techniques that we've developed here. That really helps me because it helps me to regulate my emotions. It helps me in relationships to take responsibility for my emotions. And when I say it helps to regulate the emotions, it helps to resolve trauma and trapped core emotions. And it also helps me to just feel comfortable with my emotions. When I am flooding, when I am feeling emotionally out of control, it helps me to feel comfortable with my suffering because, the somatic release protocol, the basic premise of it is you release it by feeling it. And so it creates a situation for somebody like me in which you gradually get used to all expressions of your body's emotions, of your body feeling emotions and stuff. And that's another important part of this, especially in the part where it resolves trauma-based emotions, because the trauma-based stuff really affects your interactions with people who are close to you, spouses, family members. You can easily be reacting from an old trauma that you didn't resolve, and a small argument can balloon into a huge thing because it has all the weight of my past abusive relationship. And that will all come flooding back if you don't know how to resolve that. So when I learned this somatic release technique, it took all of that trauma out, like the great majority of it out. So now if I get into a tussle or an argument with my daughter or my ex says something that would normally have triggered that trauma, because it's been resolved, there's no trauma being triggered in there anymore. I might be slightly annoyed in the moment, or maybe even be a little bit reactive, but I won't have the weight of all of those trauma memories. That sounds just like my mother, or just reminds me of this guy that then all of a sudden you're going into this story and the person can clearly see you're not in reality anymore. You're like now relating me to them, and you can't control it. This somatic release took that part of my personality away. It just dissolved it. So I don't act like that as much at all, really, anymore. And so that's why I do this. It's a part that I feel can help. And one day, maybe in one of these podcasts, we'll talk about more in depth about all the things that I do to help regulate me, because this is only a part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
With
Thank you.
that, I'm going to go ahead and drop from the call, turn off my video, and
Okay.
I'll listen with the rest of the audience.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.